I'm going to try an experiment here of wiring a radio remote control across the pins of a Ricoh CA-3 controller, which can trigger the Theta S over its USB port. You can't just start grounding pins on the USB to trigger the Theta. It requires an active pulse of some kind. This little gadget generates one. When the push button switch here is pushed, it grounds pins connected to this little control chip, which in turn outputs some voltages onto the USB pins that make the connected Theta camera release its shutter. So what I'm going to do is wire a little 2.5 millimeter audio jack that fits this sort of a plug, found on tremendous amounts of remote control gear for cameras. I'm going to wire that across this switch in such a way that when my remote control makes contact closures to ground on this audio plug, it will hopefully make this thing reduce the right voltage to trigger the Theta. So what I'm going to do is, I've already checked it out, and this is the wiring diagram. You may be able to see that. This is this little switch. Those two pins. It has a contact pin at each corner. You can just barely see the solder. You can. It's not in the light. I don't know if you can see the solder pads below them, but I can. And this corner needs to get wired to the shutter. This corner needs to get wired to the, doesn't actually need to get wired to the focus control because the Theta has no focus control. But I'm going to connect all 3 pins. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to put a glob of, I make a strip of very skinny little strip of very skinny little wire, and I'm going to take it and put a glob of solder on the end of that, a fresh glob of solder with some fresh, not too big a glob. Like that. That's a nice little glob of solder. And I'm going to take a very tiny little skinny needlepoint soldering iron. I'm going to lay the wire down. I'm going to snip a bit off of it too because it's too long. Now maybe I'll put a little glob of solder a little closer to the actual insulation. There we go. Now, properly speaking, when you solder to things that have chips on them, you want to ground your soldering iron, which I can do by means of this clip. That way, it's less likely to give an electrostatic charge to the circuit that might destroy it, because CMOS circuits are pretty sensitive to static. Anyway, all right, there we go. Now, so I'm first going to connect a red wire this red wire that I prepared here. I'm going to connect it to, if I can get all these, as you were. Electronics would be ever so much more convenient if it wasn't for wires. I prefer to do everything wireless, but unfortunately, when it comes right down to it, they all work on wires. So this damn ground wire is absolutely throwing this little box around, so let's anchor it like that. Now to sort of hold it in place even, I'm going to place my wire just there on top of the solder pad. This is an easy one because it's a big pad on the circuit board. And then I'm going to press the tip of the iron right down on top of the wire. Wait until I see the solder melt. Boop, take it away. That wire is now connected. Now I'm going to do the same thing with a white wire on the shutter, on the focus pin. There's an even nicer glob. Okay, beautiful glob. Get that one out of my way. That wire lying right down there, like a good little wire does. Oh, God, damn it. All right. Touch solder. Boom. Done. Okay, now I happen to know that the grounded side of that switch is also connected to the ground of the USB. Which is this big fat pin right here, so that's where I'm going to connect my ground wire. It's a lot easier than going around and trying to solder to those little pads on the back. And for this I might even use my big soldering iron because it's a big pin. I'm just gonna touch it on there when it melts. Boop. Okay. Now I have my 3 contacts to the switch. That's kind of a mess. Surely I have something neater than that. Let's get the proper tool here. Okay, now what I'm going to do right now is just connect my little audio jack, but because I intend to put this audio jack in this little tiny space inside the case of this thing, which is just barely big enough to hold it. I'm first of all going to snip off these plastic bosses which stick up too far. And now I'm going to flatten all of the pins right down against the top of the plastic, like that, like that. And because I know that pin over there is, sorry, this pin here is not being used. This is the tip of the plug, this is the ring, and this one here is an internal switch which just lets some pieces of equipment know that you've inserted the plug, and so I don't need that one because I'm going to bend this one over. Now they don't touch each other. Now that's good. I'm just going to let's see, I'll do this ground one last. I'm going to call the red one my tip. That's the shutter release. Okay, again, I'm going to tin these, freshly tin these wires. They are somewhat tin plated anyway, but you want fresh solder on any wire when you're going to make a quick contact. I'm going to also tin my pins, I think. Now, you can't do that very long because it'll alright, now I'm going to try and slip the well, no, I'm just going to touch solder the red wire onto the pin, onto the tip, sorry, boom. The white wire onto the ring. And the blue wire to the barrel, or ground. All right. But right now, since this is the first time I've done this, I'm going to do a test and see whether this is actually going to work. So I can wire this one to there. Now, in order to see if anything happens, I've got to connect my Theta, which this is it here. To this, the Theta gets the USB plug in here, gets the, I'm going to expose its front so we can see the lights. Okay, we need to put a battery in this little unit's battery holder. Boop. We need to make sure that it's off. That's the on-off switch there. Hook it up to the Theta. Turn on the theta. Okay, it's in non-radio, it's in non-Wi-Fi mode right now. Not sure what that little red thing's about, but let's try pushing the button here first. No. All right. Oh. All right, I'm going to turn the theta on. I'm going to turn the CA-3 on. I'm going to turn my controller on, and sure enough, when I press the button, bleep, you hear that sound? That's the theta taking a picture. Okay, same thing that would happen if I pressed this little push button here. All right, so that completes the feasibility test. Now I'm going to package this. The CA-3 has a rather tight little case. Part of it goes over the top like this. And I'm just going to make sure that that's all fits in with the wires. Okay. And that provides the push button and the slider for the on-off switch. Let's take the battery out of this too, of course. Now, where I'm going to situate my new little phone jack right there. And if you look at the other half of the case, to it, the top part of the case fits on like that, and it's all sealed up around here, so I'm going to have to make a hole for the wires to get by. But in this area here, there's enough room for this little jack to nestle in there, but I have to snip out the plastic bosses that are in there. Now, I'm going to have to bend that bit back and forth until it snaps off. It's the best plan for right now. So I'm just taking off the little residual bits of that web that are sticking out. Now I need to make a channel. Okay, it's going to be right there. And my plan to make the notch is just to do this. Melt it right in there. Boop, 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 boop. Crude but effective. So, I'm just going to basically glue this thing down on there and then pop the lid down on top of it. Okay, so I've made a recess in this piece, kind of an ugly, awkward one, that will fit around that little phone jack. I've glued the little phone jack in place on this shelf on the front of the thing, and I'm going to make a little place for the wires to come up. Again, just melt it right in there with a soldering iron, boom, like that. And I've glued the jack down onto this little shelf. I've routed the wires around through this slot here, through the slot that I melted in the edge of the plastic here. I've trimmed two of the wires short and soldered them next to the pins so that they sit very low. And I'm just about to do the third one. There we go. Strip that off. Give it a little bit of tin the end of the wire. Always do that before you touch solder. Boop. Now we just dress the wire down right next to the tab on the jack. Okay, that's sitting right beside that little metal tab that we bent down before. Touch solder it. Boom. Now, with any luck, I still have connectivity and functionality. I'm just going to try that before I bother to reassemble this thing, just to be sure. So we pull out the Theta. We plug in the USB. Stick the battery in the battery holder. Switch on the, well, let's see, I'm going to have to do it the whole thing. Plug in my radio remote. Start the other one going. Alright. Switch on this guy, switch on this guy. Press the button, nothing happens. that button, something happens. Okay, that's a sufficient test of continuity in this unit. The reason these remotes are not talking to each other is probably because the Theta does not provide a voltage on the pin sufficient to convince this guy that he's connected.